to reprise his Psalm 11 composition that everybody wanted to hear again. So let me put that up on the screen. Cantor Nimi, you are here. I see you can't come in the back door.
Am here, and actually I didn't have a chance I literally just finished at like 11 o'clock last night. I have another verse.
Wonderful.
It's in English, so you won't be able to see the text on screen, but if with permission I'll share with you all a little bit of what that second verse sounds like.
Great.
And Harold, I'll send you text after class.
And everybody wanted the text. If we could, are we okay to distribute it to everybody?
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
I mean, when you're done with it, no pressure. Wait till you feel good about distributing.
Yeah, I think that it's probably now at least quantity of lyrics is what it's going to be. I might do some poking and prodding for some of the wording.
But you can see this on screen? Yes?
No, I see psalm offerings.
No. All right, that's not what we should be seeing. Oops. This should be Jacob Nimi. Do you see this now?
I do, and let me, for myself, I need to bring up my own my lyrics for the second verse. Again, this is late last night, so just give me one moment here for myself to have my full lyrics. Great, okay. And turn on original sound, all these wonderful things that we're learning about. Remember to do, okay. What can we do when the world is a wilderness and no one can show us the way? When everything's shifting, the air filled with bitterness, does anyone know what to say? When even the very foundations are crumbling, a chasm between me and you. When even the righteous can't keep from stumbling, does anyone know what to do? Ki hashatot yeharesu Tzadik mapa'ah Ki hashatot yeharesu Tzadik mapa'ah What can we do with the shadows surrounding us and danger at every turn? When arrows are flying and God takes account of us as if we have something to learn. Is there still a chance for the good of humanity to shine from a righteous heart? Is there still a hand that could lead us to sanity? At least hold our hand in the dark. Ki hashatot yeharesu Tzadik mapa'ah Ki hashatot yeharesu Tzadik mapa'ah Ki hashatot yeharesu Tzadik mapa'ah
Wow. You know, this so reminds me, in the 1980s, I was friends with Debbie Friedman, and we met in 1985. And Jacob, I heard Lichi Lach before it was publicly known in her living room in Los Angeles. So I feel like all of us are having this incredible experience of being part of your creative process. And all of you are very, very honored, each of us who gets to be here to listen to you be part of this creative process for years. We'll be able to say we were here at the creation at the beginning. So thank you so much for that. So deeply moving.
And I appreciate having the opportunity to be in a space where I can be, vulnerable enough to share things that are still very much in process. It's hard sometimes for things to grow into what they should be if they're just in one's own head.
Yes.
So.
Isn't that profound, right? And we're your community to hear this and you speak on our behalf, and it's so moving. And I feel this about all the different ways that people are creating responses to the Psalms in the moment in time we're in, bringing all of our different pieces, the broken pieces, the pieces that feel strong, the pieces that feel scared. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And Harold, I'll send you the updated lyrics.
Terrific. Thank you, Cantor. So Rabbi, where do you want to go today?
I want to talk a little bit about biblical parallelism, and then we're going to we're going to finish Levi and then altar. Okay?
Okay.
So who here thinks that you could explain biblical parallelism? Since I've said it a few times, let's see, and I want to.
All right, I'm looking for hands in chat.
Let's see
hands
if
and
somebody else can
participants.
explain it. Because this is a very important part of studying Psalms.
Okay.
Who wants to take a shot at it?
Dun, dun, someone can do at least part of it, I know.
Yeah.
Waiting for hands.
Mm-hmm.
Sherry or Simon raised his or her hand.
Okay, I'll give it a shot. Many of the verses in the Psalms are in 2 and sometimes 3 parts. And the 2 parts usually either one reinforces the other or contrasts with the other. That's my shot at it.
Well, okay. Can I elaborate since I'm
all right, Sherry, you go ahead, Ed.
Okay, so what you have are various parts together, and if the first part says one thing, the second part might say something to intensify or increase the first part, or it might say something that contrasts it completely.
Good.
So that's how I would
excellent
further.
You guys win the Jeopardy game of biblical poetry study. The two of you, a team. It's a team. It's the Dratfield team. So you win. So this is so important to understand, and we'll look at it in all different ways. And for those of you who are new to the class, those of you who are old to the class, let me tell you something. When you study a lot of biblical poetry, this is the foundational. So I'm just going to repeat it. So, and if you have questions, ask.
Joan Friedman also, maybe Joan has something.
Oh, okay, good. Joan,
Joan also shot her hand up.
Okay, Joan.
Okay, so I wanted to add what may be a strange perspective for some people, but I was a software engineer for 20 years, and in programming, comparing stuff is a really basic thing that you do, right?
Uh-huh.
And
saying aha, but I have no idea. Yep.
Okay. Well, you compare stuff, and the model for it would be numbers. You know, is this number bigger than the other one, or is it smaller, or is it the same one?
Uh-huh.
Like, that's where it comes from. But you can compare all kinds of things, but you always have either they're the same or they're not, right? But if they're not the same, are they equal? Yeah. Or when you put them together, do you have more or do you have less?
Uh-huh. That's a great description. So the first thing is that that Psalms are a form of biblical poetry. And biblical poetry is different than biblical prose. And biblical poetry can be very difficult. Like the difference between poetry and prose in any language, right? Poetry is not going for the simplest way to say something necessarily. And there are multi-layers, which is why we love poetry, right? It gets to places that prose doesn't necessarily do. And when we talk about haiku or we talk about a sonnet, You can talk about the structure of a haiku or structure of a sonnet, which doesn't at all speak necessarily to what the words inside those structures mean. But understanding the structure helps you to understand what the writer is going for in some level. It's understanding the structure is helpful. So likewise, understanding the structure of biblical poetry is helpful when you study it, because then you can begin to ask questions of what the author is doing with that structure. So one of the foundational pieces to biblical poetry is this, what we call biblical parallelism. And it's parallelism because the generic sentence, and there are of course exceptions and we point them out, but the generic kind of the typical sentence is two halves. So it's parallel halves. So the first thing you do when you look at a biblical line in biblical poetry is say, where is the half point? And we often have to look at the ta'amim, the cantillation marks that helps us figure out which the half point is. Often it's very obvious. Sometimes it's not so obvious. And even the traditional commentators will have in their debate, is this the half point or is this the half point? And if this is the half point, this is what the sentence means. And if you shift it, but I'm looking at the simplest version of this, right? So a simple biblical poetry verse, there'll be a half point that's obvious. And each of those two phrases can be looked at separately, and they're parallel. One and the other is parallel. And that's why it's easier and it's helpful when writers or formats for a Psalms book, for instance, plays with that, and you can see quickly. But you always have to remember, whoever's doing the format's making a decision that might not always be, you might not agree with, about where the half point comes. And thank God we have Cantor Nemi and Cantor Hirsch in the class, because they know I know it on a very, very, very simple level, what the ta'amim mean, but they know much better. And they've corrected me several times because I've made a mistake, because the Psalms ta'amim are different than others. So once we have these two halves of a sentence, we understand that each half is parallel to the other half. And then it becomes interesting to understand in what way do they, and this is going to what Joan's description about the numbers, in what way are they parallel? And typically there are three different ways that they reflect a parallel expression. One is that they're equal in the sense that they're different words, but the words are like they've gone to a thesaurus and picked out a little different way of saying the same thing. You'll learn something by it. And a really famous version of that is the Ma Tovu line, right? Ma Tovu Ohalecha Yaakov. How beautiful are your tents, Jacob. Umishkanotecha Yisrael. Your dwelling place is Israel. It's a pretty equal parallel, right? We got Ma Tovu applies to both. Ohalecha, one form of a dwelling place, the tent, and using the name Yaakov, Jacob, one name. And the other half of the parallel is Mishkanotecha. It's another word for a dwelling place. And we play with what one means, what the other means, but it's using a different expression. And then it says Jacob's other name, Yisrael. So that's a very classic, you see where the dividing point is. There's not a lot of controversy about where the two halves are. And you can see that it becomes poetic because it's using different names and different ways to talk about a dwelling place. So that's the first simplest level of parallelism. The second simple, and simple is, that's a bad word. I don't mean to, it's not a value judgment, is where it's an antonym, where it is an opposite, where it's trying to say something, and the parallelism, or one is saying something completely different than the first half. And then the third version of it is where there's some intensification from 1 to 2. The intensification can be, it could take all different forms. There isn't actually a single way. It could be in the escalation. It can be an escalation of intensity. So that's a little fuzzier, but we've pointed that out, and you'll look for it. Now that is mostly, that's the kind of standard general rule for biblical parallelism poetry. Sometimes there are 3 phrases, and we've seen that. And sometimes the phrases, like in Psalm 3, the first verse in Psalm 3 doesn't seem to fit in any of those. So again, there are many, many, many exceptions, but to approach biblical poetry and the Psalms specifically, biblical parallelism is essential to, so when I use the phrase biblical parallel or parallelism, I want to just make sure everybody gets that at this point. Any questions, or is there anything confusing about that? Because it's really a great thing to understand.
I think the comments are basically that they're understanding it and just expressing it in different ways.
Perfect.
Yeah, I don't see anyone with a hand raised for a question.
Great. And those of you who are newer to the class, if you haven't listened to all of the sessions, there are times when we take a break from the actual Psalms and study something that will enhance our appreciation, whether it's the historical or the musical or the Greek or Latin versions of these texts. We've had a fun time of exploring different things.
Sherry Dratfield then just put up her hand after I said there were no hands.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted you, if you might, take a moment for those third, when there are 3 parts rather than 2 parts. Is there any kind of continuity there or anything?
Sometimes there is, and that's always a question to ask. And I don't have examples in my head. We'll look for them. Sometimes it's simply clearly the author. We had, I think it's in, maybe it might even be Psalm 1. I think it's in Psalm 1. Am I right? Yes, there's an escalation. So happy the man who has not walked in wicked's counsel, 1, nor in the ways of offenders has stood, 2, nor in the session of scoffers has sat, 3. And if you remember, we talked about those are escalating exposures to evil, so to speak. You start by just walking with, you stand with, and then you live with, sit with. So in that case, the opening of verse 1 shows a 3 that is actually an intensification or an escalation of acts. So we have halach, amad, and yashav. Those are 3 verbs of, and remember, I think when we started talking about this, the psalmist is saying, this is how we get inured to evil, right? We start by listening to the words and we get affected. And then we start by attaching ourselves, standing with the evil, and then we really join with them. Mm-hmm. So here's an example. This begins the book of Psalms. And so it's not, I would not say it's rare that there's 3. It's just not the standard. So, it's one of those things where we have the rule, which is parallelism of 2, but there are many examples of the 3.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So where now?
Okay. So shall we go back to Levi? I don't think we finished Levi yesterday.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Let me get Levi up on the screen.
By the way, I think those of you who joined in the more recent times and then went back and listened to all the classes deserve a special little medal. Okay. So would somebody just read it through in English just to bring us back to it?
Is Ora Izraki here? Ora has asked to be a reader. Ora, are you here? Oops, I don't see Ora. So someone raised their hand. Let's see. Someone raised their hand to read, please. Okay, Ira Rosenblum would like to read.
Okay.
Ira?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
For the conductor of David, in Adonai have I taken refuge. How can you say to me, take flight to your mountain, O bird? For behold, the wicked aim a bow. They have readied their arrow on a bowstring to shoot in the dark at the upright of heart. For the foundations are torn down. What has the just one done? Adonai is in holiness enshrined. Adonai is in heaven enthroned. Divine eyes take in, the eyelids try all human beings on earth. Adonai tries the just, but the wicked and the lover of violence God despises with all his being. God rains hot coals upon the wicked, their cups roil with fire and brimstone and wind-whipped flames. Adonai, who is just, loves just actions. God's face is taken in by the upright.
Thank you, Ira. So you can see here what that Levi is really trying to show you the parallelism, both in the Hebrew, the way he writes the Hebrew sentences, and in his English translation. He understands this structure, so he's building that into his formatting of the Hebrew and English, which doesn't mean, again, doesn't mean this is the right way and any other way is the wrong way. He's playing with it himself. Sometimes I think he makes the decisions just to fit the Hebrew and English, in their columns, but mostly he's doing that. So for instance, let's look at line 3 and 4. So this is one verse, but you'll notice, what's it called? The M dash, is that right, Ira? So we've talked about that. There's all different ways to indicate the pausal form between the two phrases. So in verse 3, Ki hashatot yeh haresun, for or when or if or at the time that the foundations are destroyed. And then he's choosing to do that M dash to indicate it's a pause, but it's like that, the speaker is kind of Sadiq Mapa'al, what has the just one done? Now, what is he doing with the word Sadiq here? I haven't seen others translate it this way, so I found this fascinating. So Sadiq, what does Sadiq mean? Sadiq is from the root word Sadi, Dalid Kuf, the 3-letter root, from the same words as Tzedakah, or
it would seem in his initial caps that he believes that the just one here is God.
Isn't that interesting? Exactly. He is doing something the other translations didn't do. And when we were playing with the original Hebrew, we were translating this more along the line, Sadiq meaning a just person. What should a just person do? Levi sees it quite differently. Levi says, for the foundations are torn down, what has the just one? Exactly as Harold said, you can look in his English and you see by the capitalizations of just one, he's making this the deity. He's making Sadiq here the just one. So as we see, Levi's doing something very different with his translation. Going on to 4, Yud He Vav He, God, Behechal Kodsho. Adonai is in holiness enshrined. Fascinating translation. Instead of in his holy, we've translated Heichal sometimes as palace or grand, some kind of housing, but he's very interesting translation. In holiness is enshrined. So using enshrined and Heichal, Adonai is in heaven enthroned. So kiseh here is a chair or a throne. Kiso is his throne, but Levi's doing a very interesting translation and saying enthroned in the metaphorical sense, not sitting on a throne. Divine eyes take in, the eyelids try all beings on the earth. 5, Yud He Vav He, Tzaddik Yivchan, Adonai tries the just. Again, a very interesting translation. But the wicked and the lover of violence, God despises with all his being. He gets the capital H and being. He's clarified here any confusion for him. For Levi, nafsho is referring back to God. See that? Does everybody see that? Nafsho, then you can, and as Harold pointed out, it's always the capitalizations in English helps us know when they're talking about a deity or not. In Hebrew, there's no capitalization. So it's often a little bit more confusing to figure out what the antecedent is of a particular pronominal suffix of the thing at the end of a word, which indicates a pronoun. So God rains. So this is a feeling. God rains hot coals upon the wicked. Their cups royal, right? Is that the right?
Yes.
Royal with fire and brimstone and whipped flames. Ki tzaddik Adonai, God who is just, tzedakot ahev, loves just actions. God's face is taken in by the upright. Okay, I just wanted to point out some of those interesting things that Levi does. Any reactions or questions or responses to
Or
this?
Karen Kropp has had her hand up for 5
Oh, I'm sorry, Karen.
Okay.
Nope, that's okay. That's okay. I think that this Levi's interpretation of the line about the righteous being God in this case, and as compared to the other ways we've been talking about it, just raises a question for me or shows a contrast to me that you could read that line as being, what have the righteous done to cause the foundations to crumble? The foundations are crumbling. Where have the righteous been? Or what have they done? Either
Good
to
question.
cause it to happen, or what have they not done to cause it to happen, versus the way we've been thinking about it sort of more hopefully in some respects. The foundations are crumbling. What are the righteous to do about it? So I've been thinking about that the whole time we've been reading all the different versions of this.
Yep. Excellent. Really good questions. Great.
Jeremy.
I have a question about Levy's note on
Yes, there are a lot. He has a lot of notes on the bottom of the page.
yeah, on the note that's confusing to me. It has a lot of reference to Hebrew.
Which
The note number 7, God's face is taken in. He writes, the Hebrew literally translates as God's face is taken in by the upright, where the plural verb, yechetzu, demanded by the plural face, phonemo, can be seen as passive. The longer translation reflects the relationship between the word to see from the word root chetzai and hey, and the noun chazon, vision, which introduces 3 prophet books. It is the same verb as used in verse 4, where we have rendered as take in, so just God's eyes can take in human beings, so just human beings can take in, see God.
Jeremy, I'm with you. My eyes glaze over reading that note.
Okay, well, fine.
I just glaze over.
We'll just
study this. Oh my God, I agree with you. It's very obscure. Okay, maybe somebody else will be able to figure it out. I have to look at it and read the pasuk at the same time very carefully.
Yeah, I mean, I've been going back and forth, but I just can't figure it out.
You'll figure it out, Jeremy. You'll explain it to me.
All right.
But I agree with you. It's Gewalt.
So should we turn to Randy Axelrod then?
Yes.
Randy?
Thanks, Jeremy.
When he uses the word Adonai in some places and then God in some places, is that based on the Hebrew literally, or is that his interpretation?
Good question. Let's look back at the original Hebrew, because he changes the Hebrew, which I'm not crazy about precisely for that reason, but I understand why he does it. So let's see, where does he say God? Give me
verse 5. Verse 5, he says God, although it is, he's neither Adonai. So we have Adonai in the beginning of 5 is here, and then God despises with all his being. It does not.
So what he's doing, where it says God, he's adding that in to clarify the who's speaking. Where he says Adonai, it's definitely reflecting Yud He Vav He.
Because it just seems that aside from the very last sentence, that when he uses Adonai, it's the kind, nurturing God, and then when he uses the word God, it's the vengeful.
No, he's making it clear, because the Hebrew is only has the you know, the pronominal, the pronoun references. So he's clarifying it by adding, instead of saying he, and he's both clarifying and he wants to avoid saying he a lot. So so instead of saying he does this, he does that, he does this. And I think he does that all the way through. He just adds the word God, so he doesn't have to use the masculine.
Okay, thank you.
You'll notice there's no masculine he in the English.
Mhm.
And wherever there would be kind of the he in the Hebrew, he uses the word God. That's very good. I've never noticed that before. So that's an excellent, thanks for that question.
Thank you.
Randy Sarakoff.
Yeah, in the third verse, for the foundations are torn down, what has the just one done? In this case, referring to Yud He Vav He. I think he answers that in 7 indifferent. Adonai, who is just, loves just actions. God's face is taken in by the upright. That is saying to me that it's in our actions. God put it in our hands to do just actions, to make a difference in this world,
That's a beautiful
to
point.
increase holiness. So it starts with what has God done? He's leaving it to us, for us to make a difference and increase holiness in this world.
Beautiful. Randy, that's beautiful.
Ira.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the end of verse 4 and beginning of verse 5 in terms of the word try and tries, as seeing that, you know, that God is putting people through a trial of some point, of some kind, sort of testing humanity and seeing how people respond to the stuff that God's throwing at us, which is, and then I'm sort of, I took out the Fisher to see what word he used, and he uses the word proves, which I didn't quite ever understand what exactly he meant by that. He says, your gaze still proves us. I know you prove the upright. But what I'm struck with here in the Levi is that there's this idea that God is sort of throwing all these hardships at us and seeing what we're going to do with it, as opposed to, I'm not quite sure what Fisher means, but knowing that Fisher is coming from the Zen Buddhist place, I think it's probably something very different. Do you have anything you can say about that?
I was curious about that too. I sometimes wish, although I know it would make the book so huge, or that there were another book with commentary by the authors about why they made some of the choices they made, because wouldn't that be fascinating? But of course, that would be the Reform movement many years ago, when they published the previous Machzor and Siddur, not this generation, put out a book which I loved, which is explaining all the editor's choices. So so they didn't burden the Machzor itself with constant commentary, why they did this, why they did that, but you could take out the other book, and that, you know, pretty much probably only rabbis did, but it was really fantastic to see why did they make this choice in the translation and why did they make that choice. And you got to kind of hear the editorial debates. But I don't know why Fisher did that. I'd love to know. And in fact, yeah, I don't understand it. I was hoping maybe, Ira, since you had more of a Buddhist background, the word would mean something to you, but it doesn't, right? Yeah, okay. So there you go.
All right. Cantor Nimi.
Right. Yep.
I was just noting kind of on that point and on that word that it seems to be related to the modern Hebrew word mivchan, meaning test.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if there's a sense of God testing, and maybe the meanings seem to be connected to one another, but there's nuance between them.
Yeah.
There's some proving, testing, trying.
Yeah.
There seem to be some connection in the meaning, but it's hard because like maybe the English doesn't capture the nuance of the Hebrew word.
Yeah.
Jerry or Simon?
And remember, we always have to be careful. Just that we always have to be careful. Modern Hebrew is fun because it's fun to see what modern Hebrew did, taking this language and adding it to a modern language. But so it's fun to see where it is in modern Hebrew. But you can't use modern Hebrew to understand the biblical Hebrew. You know, but it is fun. I love it. And those of us who know even a little bit enjoy so much watching how biblical Hebrew words get used in contemporary ways. There is no other example of this, I think, in a language, right? Because classical Greek is different than modern Greek, so. Anyway.
There is a dictionary definition of prove as test, just so you know.
So then it's on that spectrum.
Yeah, there are two points I wanted to talk about. One that was brought up by Ira, where he talks about verse 5, Adonai tries the just. It's interesting that he uses tries where in, say, the Sepharia thing, it's seeks. So seeks out the righteous man. So that distinction, maybe you want to comment on that. But even more important, I think, is...
You're talking about in verse 7? Which verse?
That's, no, verse 5.
Verse 5,
Tries the just versus seeks. But more important, I think, even than that, is in number 3, the foundations are torn down. What has the just one done? As if it were God who has created, has torn down the foundations. Karen was saying the just people might have torn them down, but here it seems to imply that Adonai, God's self, has done that.
I think absolutely Levy is making a very bold statement here. There's no way, Levy is making a leap to say that Sadiq means God. I'm not criticizing the leap, but this would not be this is definitely he's making a strong statement by saying Sadiq here means God, which is, I think, fascinating, which is, since I think this verse is such a powerful verse, it's a very interesting read to it.
And the seek versus versus tries, any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know how they would get seek from Yivchan, except it means to examine, like as Yael said, it means both a medical examination, it means a test. So maybe to seek by looking for something, but I don't have any. I'd have to really be deep to see if there are other references.
Okay, thank you.
We have more comments. Do we have time? We don't have time to go to altar?
Well, I was going to say, I know we have offerings that we could start tomorrow. We could go to altar briefly, or we could finish up. We have a few questions here on Levy. So how do you want to do this?
Let's do a few questions on Levy, and then we'll see where we are.
But Linda Solomon.
Okay, on verse 3, for the foundations are torn down, what has the just done? I don't see this as necessarily a blame of God for the tearing down of the foundations, but necessarily could be what has the just one done to eradicate the tearing down of the foundations.
Respond to it.
A response,
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
That was my point.
And altar, by the way, and maybe we won't do altar in tomorrow, because you're welcome to look at altar. I think Harold sent it to you. But altar's line for that sentence, which is the only that was the foundations destroyed, comma, what can a righteous person do? So that really goes to a little bit to Linda and to what Karen Kropp said also earlier.
Michael Goldstein.
Thank you. I want to go back to 5. I don't know whether this was brought up or not. Adonai tries the just. How about using the word challenges instead of tries? Adonai challenges the just.
That it could absolutely be in your personal response to it. Absolutely. I love that.
Thank you.
Because that is, after all, what it's about in some ways, right? I mean, in that, we don't like the concept of tests, right? Who wants, test school for the test, etc. And I think the idea behind the idea, for me, the idea behind the idea that God tests us is what I said earlier this week or last week, that we're given options of how to respond to every situation we're in. The question is, when do we give up? When do we respond by strengthening ourselves as best we can? When do we pray? When do we do, well, how is our, and that's what I feel like the question always is how do we respond to the very foundations being crumbled, How do we respond to evil in the world? How do we respond to the unjust thriving and the just being oppressed? And that's for me what this word always is about, is what is going to be our response when these things happen? Thank you, Michael.
Challenge, or you're searching for the right answer among those options.
Yeah, and it's a challenge to us always to be, right? Isn't it a challenge? So I like that word. I like it very much.
Thank you.
Ari Montz put something very interesting in chat. Ari, would you like to share that with us?
Sure. Yeah, I said that this translation.
How did the matzo ball soup come out?
It was really good. I only had lemon seltzer, but it actually turned out fine.
Great. Ari was making matzo ball soup during our new members session last night. I was very jealous.
Yeah, I was saying that this version of verse 5 using Adonai tries the just instead of the Sepharia translation of the Lord seeks out the righteous kind of reminds me of Job, which makes me a little bit uncomfortable. Job is not my favorite story in the Bible. But then what you and Michael were just talking about is maybe it's an opportunity instead of a let me see how much you love me, which is kind of how I read Job at times.
Yeah. Job is a hard book.
Yeah, it's a hard book.
A hard book. And I think it's always, that's our question as human beings, right? How do we respond over situations and external things over which we have no control? The only thing we have control over, what are our responses, right? That's how do we respond when bad things happen? How do we respond in our own self when we're facing difficult demons inside of ourselves? How do we respond? Do we seek out help? Do we try or do we, give up? And over and over and over again, we understand that I believe what Judaism is about and what most religions are about is trying to diminish the gap between falling down and getting back up again. Not saying you're not going to screw up, or you're not going to be overwhelmed, or you're not going to collapse, but the question is, how quickly can you get back up again? How quickly can you understand that renewal, trying again, second chances are a part of being a human being? And that, I think, is the challenge ultimately. It's not to criticize ourselves for the fact that we failed, for the fact that we gave up and curled up in bed for 3 days, or for the fact that we got, we jumped off the sobriety wagon. You can't, what you have to do is, the question is, okay, what's the next step you're going to take? And that, I believe, is the power of what the psalmists are saying to us. We have to accept we're deeply flawed human beings. And the question is, okay, after screwing up, what's the next step? And you're never off the hook, so to speak. You're never given the opportunity to say, okay, I've tried enough times, I'm done. It's like you have to keep diminishing the gap between falling down and getting up. And that's the best we can hope for, because we're not going to not fall down. We're not going to not screw up. We're not going to not be disappointments to ourselves and to those we love, et cetera. That's for sure. The question is, how quickly do we get ourselves back up?
So, Rabbi.
Yes, are we?
No, that's wonderful. You were getting a lot of thumbs up in the chat. Just a little housekeeping thing.
We give a lot of love to Harold. Isn't he amazing?
Oh.
Isn't Harold the best? Thank you, Harold.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you. The labor of love.
Yeah.
So it looks like we'll be starting with offerings then tomorrow, which is Thursday, and then we're off on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, right? And we have enough offerings tomorrow. We already have enough offerings to get us through tomorrow. So I'm going to give people a little extension that if you haven't sent in an offering, but you have something to send in, you can send it in as long as Annika has it by 5 o'clock on Monday. We will have those for Tuesday. And without giving away too much, we have some offerings from new people. And we have an offering in a medium that we have not yet had an offering in.
Wow, so
we have that to look forward to also. For everyone, I will repeat that all of the books that we have are in our little Amazon list. I know some people would prefer to shop at bookshop.org, which is great, but to put them together in one place, we have that. I've sent that out before. And I think that is it for me. And why don't we go to Cantor Nimi for one more run through of his song. How does that sound?
Great.
He just sent me, I believe, the new lyrics that I may actually be able to put up. Yes.
And it actually has a title now too.
Actually has a title. How about this? The wonders of technology, will they never cease?
And while you're bringing it up, I'll say what the title is. It's Ma Pa'al is going to be the title, I think.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah, it contains, because for me, I think it contains the idea of not only what has the righteous person done, what has the tzaddik done, but what can the righteous person do, and all of that is kind of wrapped up and contained within it. So these are the full lyrics. What can we do when the world is a wilderness and no one can show us the way? When everything's shifting, the air filled with bitterness, does anyone know what to say? When even the very foundations are crumbling, a chasm between me and you. When even the righteous can't keep from stumbling, does anyone know what to do? Ki hashatot yeharesu tzaddik mapa'al ki hashatot yeharesu tzaddik what can we do with the shadows surrounding us and danger at every turn? When arrows are flying, God takes account of us as if we have something to learn. Is there still a chance for the good of humanity to shine from a righteous heart? Is there still a hand that could lead us to sanity? At least hold our hand in the dark. Ki hashatot yeharesu tzaddik mapa'al ki hashatot yeharesu tzaddik mapa'al hashatot yeharesu tzaddik mapa'al
Gorgeous, gorgeous. Thank you, Cantor Nimi. Thank you. What a gift to all of us. All right, everybody. See you tomorrow. Enjoy the debate tonight.
Okay, bye-bye.
She's